Ah, shit, he called the video a postmortem. More like a 3-month late to the party that started 9 months ago. Mortem. Why didn't he wait until the inevitable season 2 before he shat all over it? The world may never know. So Shield Hero is a thing. It's a fantasy isekai anime from January of this year, 2019, about a guy who gets transported to another world, gets mysterious video game-like powers, and is tasked with the inevitable mission to save the world from destruction. Or else? The initial premise of the series really isn't all that much to write home about. And while my words on the topic will probably seem quite negative on the work, it's not because Shield Hero is technically all that bad, but rather to me it's just infuriating. My initial thoughts on the series was that it was a bare-bones mishmash of well-established isekai tropes that tries to disguise itself as something truly good by just having far better production quality than it deserves. You can also call this the Sword Art Online effect, because we have to get that joke in here somewhere. When a well-written work gets an above-average level of production, it becomes a masterpiece that can transcend all, even years after its release. Shield Hero did not seem like that to me at all when I first watched it. It's pretty yes, and its soundtrack is phenomenal. Which I'm saying because I think it is, and not because I've actually had sushi with the composer and think that he's a great bloke. But as far as a piece of entertainment, I felt like Shield Hero was just an example of someone chucking a bunch of money at it with hopes that overproducing it would have a good effect. Which arguably, it did. It's still trending relatively high on Crunchyroll's popular anime tab, despite it being like 3-ish months since the show ended, sitting at just under a show that is still airing, or was when I took that screenshot. Also, the fact that the Shield Hero ad loaded while I was taking said screenshot is just... But here's the thing. I wanted to try something new with this video. While it should be very clear that I do have major problems with this series, and if that's not clear yet, it might be soon. I do realize that it does still hold a semblance of popularity and interest with some people. So rather than simply disregarding the likes of those people for whatever reason, I wanted to see if I could figure out if some of my major problems with this series are just personal gripes that I have or something else. Are there highlights to this show that potentially could be major positives for some people that I just can't see because I can't get over my own problems or biases? And really, I just want to know, to be able to explain to myself, at the very least, of why people like the show in a way that I can rationalize when I personally had to stop multiple times during my watch through because I just found things insufferable. Well, ladies, gentlemen, and others, my name is Arcada, and welcome to Glass Reflection, where today we are looking at the first season of the 2019 adaptation for Rising of the Shield Hero. Let's jam. Hey, if you couldn't figure it out by this point, there's a decent chance that I'm gonna be, spoiling things about the plot of this series for a variety of reasons. If that bothers you, feel free to stop now. Otherwise, carry on. So let's start a bit backwards so that we can properly begin with the obvious good points, the things that I'd like to hope are objectively positive. The animation production was handled by the crew over at Kinema Citrus, coming off the success of both the depressing fantasy adventure that was Made in Abyss from 2017 and last year's musical extravaganza, Revue Starlight. As such, it shouldn't be controversial to say that Shield Hero looks gorgeous. From top to bottom, the designs of the characters and the backgrounds, alongside the action animation, and even UI elements make the series land on a step higher than some of its genre contemporaries. I'm using contemporaries like this is an old show. What's wrong with me? The music and sound design is equally of high quality, though this here is even where I start getting into my issues. Listening to the soundtrack on its own, you get this feeling of the kind of show Shield Hero wants to be, but the issues that I have are twofold, even if they are personal gripes. One, while listening to the soundtrack after having watched the show, I could never get that, playback feeling in my head. where I can imagine, just by listening to the soundtrack, what is happening in the episode at the time that this song was playing. Contrast that with, like, Made in Abyss, by both the same studio and composer, and that's very different, as I can listen to that and joyfully recall the majority of narrative beats from the series, just from hearing the soundtrack. I don't claim to be an expert on music or how it can benefit a narrative, but in my layman opinion, especially in the early episodes of this series, I kept feeling like the soundtrack wasn't given enough room to breathe in the same way that others do. I went into this series knowing that I would probably love the soundtrack, given its pedigree, but could honestly say that after the first 3 or 4 episodes that I didn't remember much of the music from those episodes. I can listen to the OST on its own and love it, but I just felt that in the show itself, it got pushed to the sidelines, which is a real shame, because it's great. So what I'm really saying is go listen to the soundtrack, because it's literally the best thing here. Alright, so, with the obvious good points out of the way, I wanted to move on, even though I've already talked about some negatives, into the elements that I personally had a lot of problems with. I know what a lot of other people have problems with as far as the narrative of the show is concerned, and rather than regurgitate the majority of that, I wanted to elaborate on my issues, in which some of them kind of align with those people's thoughts, but maybe just from a different angle. I have been able to pare down my problems with Shield Hero to 2 main issues. We could argue and discuss other issues and their relevance and be here all day, but most of them can all come down to 2 factors. At least to me. 1, the pacing. 2, the main character. The pacing is, well, to bring up the SAO comparison again, it too decides that time jumping and quickly moving from major story beat to major story beat, in lieu of actually taking a moment to breathe and let us see how these characters live in this world, is the right way to have us enamored by its characters. The plot as a general, we have to save the world story is restricted in that the end of the world comes in waves. Literal waves of enemies appear after a set amount of time, and they're either defeated by the heroes, or the world is destroyed. With each wave scaling in difficulty like this was a tower defense game, the waves could almost make good bookends on various acts, but the writing has other plans. The characters could spend the arc either learning something new about the laws of the world, building up to a brand new challenge of the next wave, but we don't get that. The first wave we experience is after what could best be described as a montage. Time skips forward like a month in the 3rd episode just so that we can get to the wave and hopefully progress to the story beyond it. Now, you can argue that nothing interesting could happen in that month, and doing a training montage instead just saves time to get to the more meaty bits of the story. But I would instead argue that this month would have been the perfect time to do a bunch of world building. Like, at this point, we're only at the 3rd episode. We know very little about this fantasy world and even how the gaming mechanics properly function. Now Fumi keeps getting new functions for his shield, but we never get to see him use much, if any of them. He just sort of has them for future battles, like the MacGuffin that comes in handy with just the right shield for the situation that they just happen to pick up off screen. We haven't even really, by this point, explained what the Shield Hero is exactly. So, like, what's his purpose or his place in the group of heroes? Are there other places in the world besides the country they started in? And what I thought would have been super important for Naofumi to try and find out around this time, what is the history of the Shield Hero and why were people against him even before he showed up? The slightly more frustrating thing in hindsight is that most of these questions aren't even answered after the whole 1st season. But instead of any of that, the pacing of the story suffers because we keep trying to skip ahead to what it feels like are the more interesting bits, without realizing that, at least for me, that what Shield Hero thinks is important storytelling is the same kind of thing that enrages me as a viewer. Which leads us to our second point. Naofumi is an asshole. what is the purpose of the main character, especially in an action series such as this? The main character is one who the audience is supposed to either relate to in experiences or at least show empathy toward and want to cheer for. When our main character eventually finds themselves against impossible odds, we, the audience, want to be able to cheer them on, to hope and pray for their success, even if, well, of course the good guy's gonna win in the end, but that fact doesn't matter, because it's the willpower and gumption of our hero that wins us over. But I didn't get that with Fumi. Like at all. Hell, when a new villain shows up to utterly smack down the heroes into the dirt, I should not be cheering for her, pleading, yes, please, just end this already. And no, I'm not biased just because her name is Glass. This is like walking into a showing of Jaws, just to cheer for the shark. Like, you can do it, but it's in no way what the creators intended. Like, don't get me wrong, I can see why many people sympathize with Fumi and why the show wants me to be sympathetic. He got dealt a bad hand. Nothing really goes right for him, he's ridiculed at every turn, and the story against him becomes stupidly predictable in a way that is sighingly obvious. Like anytime Fumi is having a good day, that exact scene leads into a brand new horrible situation where the world is out to screw him. And the question of why is one that the show pretty much refuses to answer in any satisfying way. The king of the land has a bone to pick with him from almost day one, seemingly with some kind of history or belief that the shield hero is responsible for something tragic in his family, but the story, at least in the show so far, never wants to explain this. Malty is the first real antagonist for the series, maybe? Both because she steals all of Fumi's belongings and also begins his initial fall into disfavor by falsely accusing him of sexual assault. But her motivations are never really explained. After the accusations, she ends up joining the Spear Heroes party as his second in command, and she ends up wrapping him around her little finger to help achieve her desires for more power among the nobility and potentially the crown itself. But nothing makes it clear that framing Fumi was necessary for any of that. And her antagonistic attitude towards him just comes off as trite and forced. Her schemes almost become laughable by how cartoonishly evil they sound, and the only real explanation the show gives us is, well, there's no other antagonist, and we don't want to treat the waves as this evil force without a face, so here's this bitch. Now, it also doesn't help that virtually everybody else in this show is an asshole too. The other heroes keep moving on a scale from just oblivious to negligibly incompetent. Fumi makes a comment at one point that they treat saving the world like it's a video game. That's pretty much dead on. Their behavior both to the mission, their party, and each other is recognizable to anyone who's been in a hardcore MMO raiding team before. And not the parties that actually get world firsts, which is half the problem. From the moment they take 2 steps into this world, they have an air and attitude like they know exactly what they are doing. That they are the best people for the job, and that everybody else should just bow before their awesomeness, because they're the heroes. They get it set in their mind what the best way to do something is, and they will smack their faces into the wall continually, despite evidence to the contrary. They have gaming knowledge and experience, sure, but I get the feeling that they are far more used to following guides of other gamers that other people have created and then reiterating that back to their party like they came up with the strategy in the first place. They're like the guy who shows up to a blind run of a Savage raid having already seen a walkthrough and lambasts everybody else for not seeing the obvious mechanics that they themselves just innately knew. Which is all bullshit. Problem being, in this particular case, there's no guide for them to follow. So they muddle their way through, and of course take all the credit at the end. The second wave had them be completely incompetent, and help with exactly zilch in defeating both the actual boss and Glass when she makes her initial appearance. You'd think that this would be a sobering experience for them, telling them that perhaps their current strategies need improvement, and that if a guy without a weapon who's under-leveled to boot could do so much better than them, that something needs to change. That they needed to, what's the words? Get good. But no, they don't change. If anything, they double down. When the third wave comes around, we see them get blasted away, and then they need to be saved by their NPC party members. Only to, of course, infuriatingly waltz up at the end, expecting the good loot. Several characters state throughout the series that the four heroes need to team up to even have a chance to save the world. But at least in this first season, having not looked at the manga or the light novel, there is no concrete evidence shown that that is a winning strategy at all. But how does everybody else being an asshole make now Fumi an asshole? Is he not just a victim of circumstance who, like almost every action hero before him, overcomes adversity to prevail against evil? Or something like that? True. Yes, that does happen. But he does it in the most spiteful and begrudging way possible. Now this is where and why I feel like my enjoyment of this show is hampered compared to maybe actual fans of the series. Because I have particular notions as to what a hero is, and roughly how a hero should act. While they're not as rigid like a D&D alignment type rule where one expects hero to be lawful goody-goodies, and I also don't deny the role that anti-heroes can have in stories, there is a particular way I expect heroes to take the high ground when possible. Naofumi is the kind of guy that goes low at every opportunity. Again, the argument in his favor is that most of the time he is only responding to the people with the same level of antagonism that is shown to him, and why should he attempt to be respectful or show any level of decency when he himself is given none? Why take the high ground when he can go low, get what he wants, and then still have the satisfaction that he was able to toss that last little bit of extra dirt? And if you want to go that way, sure, but for me, that's why I can't relate to him. Why I can't cheer for him, and why there came a point when I stopped looking at the actions of those against him with the belief that they were just being completely unfair, and just started thinking, yeah, that's rough, buddy. Because now Fumi has already shown me that there is a really good possibility that if he had the power and ability from the get-go, he'd probably be just as spiteful as those that he's against. He just never seems to have the upper hand. Now, I want to somehow think positively for a moment. I also like to think that a character under the right circumstances can be redeemed through their actions. I'd like to think that someone who started off as an absolute asshole can properly turn into a half-decent human being by the end. There are plenty of examples throughout popular culture where real villains and antagonists can become, if not lovable heroes, at least understood entities that even if we can't see why they are evil and understand that they can't ever be good, we don't fault them so much as faulting the experiences through which they went through to get to where they are. Redemption arcs are very much a well-known thing, so I'd like to assume that one of the reasons why people find enjoyment with this series is because, unlike me, people can forgive actions that Naofumi makes because a future redemption is presumed. That his actions towards Raphtalia and Filo end up changing his attitude for the better, so that eventually, when distanced far enough from the elements of the world that gave him so much grief, that he can slowly, over the course of the story, become a better person. But in this case, it's not something the story had anywhere near enough time to showcase. While I can be optimistic and think that our recently announced seasons 2 and 3 will be able to take a semblance of character redemption and properly put that into place, not just for Naofumi, right? But for the rest of the heroes as well, so that they can also eventually become, you know, one big team and save the world. I have nagging suspicions that it won't happen this way, which is the underlying issue that I think really factors in to if you are likely to both watch and enjoy this series, as well as look forward to more of the show being adapted. There are plenty of people who dropped the show after the first 3 episodes, or didn't even start the show at all, because they heard what happens to Fumi, they heard how he reacts to it, how the show and the characters frame him both narratively and literally, and how the series tries to set itself apart from others in the genre. And I just think that there is a line for most people on how far a character can go before they are considered irredeemable, and for many, Fumi and Shield Hero as a series cross that line almost instantly. But there are others who can get through the series and either believe that a kind of redemption for Fumi is in the cards, or believe that he has been completely justified since the beginning. Their line is a little further out. Maybe a lot further out. And the show hasn't or may never cross the line for those people. But I can't speak for them. I can only speak for my own personal opinion on the series and whether I am looking forward to more. And that's something which I can at least say I'm not excited for more Shield Hero. But I also don't carry the same rage and frustration towards it that I did at the beginning. I am of the mindset that even if Fumi gets redemption or moves in that direction, then there's still plenty about the world of Shield Hero that stops it from being an enjoyable show for me. Outside of Fumi's party and really the proper otherworldly antagonists, there is almost no one in the supporting cast I care about. The other heroes are constantly acting in idiotic ways, and in fact, my opinion of them has only worsened with every appearance. The Queen's actions and choices have been extremely questionable, and even if I can come to like Fumi, which is an extremely hard sell, then I still might want him to fail anyway, because I keep finding myself cheering for the bad guys. So really, that's my problem. I just don't care enough. So what would I say that you should watch instead? Oh boy, I am not sure. Like, there are plenty of other shows in the genre that I think do similar things, but do them better, like Log Horizon or even ReZero. So check those out if you haven't. Really though, I think one recommendation that I have might seem a bit out there. But if you haven't watched Bokurano yet, I highly recommend it. Mostly because when Shield Hero has been giving us this tiny taste of where it's going with Glass and her party against Fumi and the heroes of his world, I can't help but think the whole thing sounds very similar to something that Bokurano did. Just, you know, nowhere near as good. So while Bokurano is far more drama and mecha focused, the events that happen to that world and those elements might play a factor in Shield Hero's future plot. So that'll be a good comparison if and when Shield Hero does indeed go down that route. If I've interested you in Shield Hero enough so that you want to check it out yourself and form your own opinion, which is possible, then you can check it out over on Crunchyroll. Also, should you prefer the manga or the light novel upon which all of this was based, perhaps to see if that would give you a different outlook on the material as a whole, both of them are available from our good friends over at Bookwalker. There will be a coupon code in the description for first-time users of their service, should you require it, so please check that out. I am very, very sorry to people that love Shield Hero the Pieces. I know that you're out there, and I don't think worse of you, but there are just things about it I can't get over, that I can't forgive, and while I am leaving it open for perhaps the later seasons to impress me, I am really not optimistic. But I'll give it a shot. Why is that? Because I have the support to be able to do that from the wonderful people who support me over on Patreon. Man, that was a horrible segue. Specifically, though, I want to give particular shoutouts to patrons Hector Montemayor, Siri Yamako, Ryfen Bonaparte, Rune Jacobson, Calhoun Boy, and Richard Bradley for being especially awesome. You guys are great. So, that is it for me. Feel free to go down in the comments and let me know how wrong I am. Tweet at me, too. I sure as hell won't block you. And ladies, gentlemen, and others, until next time, watch more anime and stay frosty.